Okay, welcome back. In this tutorial, we're just going to continue working with the for loop in JavaScript, but instead of just logging out numbers to the console, I want you to be aware that for loops actually work very well with arrays. So for the first time in this course, we're going to use the for loop to iterate over an array of values, okay? So we have that to look forward to in this tutorial. Before I do that, however, I just want us to log out to the console numbers 1 to 10 just for a bit more practice, okay? So just so you're familiar with the for loop syntax. So we know what we can do is we can use the for keyword. So we have our for loop, and what we need to do is initialize our counter variable. So I'm going to say let counter be equal to 0. We're going to start counting at 0, and what I want to do is I want to run the counter variable while it is less than or equal to 10. So we've seen this syntax before. And after each loop iteration, I just want to use the increment operator to increment the value of counter. Okay? And then what I can do is just log out to the console. I am in loop number. Okay? And all we're going to do here is just comma separate and log out our counter variable. Okay, awesome. So what have we done here? We've used the for keyword to create a for loop, and inside of parentheses we have our three expressions. Here we are initializing our counter variable. We're saying let counter equal 0. So the let keyword is used for the first time here as we initialize a counter variable with the value of 0. So we're going to start counting at 0. You can change that to be 1 if you want to count from 1 to 10 inclusive. Then what we're going to do is we're going to have our while condition, and essentially we're going to run the loop while counter is less than or equal to 10. Okay, so while this condition evaluates to true, we're going to keep entering the code block for the for loop or running the loop. Okay, so then what we do is we enter the loop for the first time and we just log out to the console. I am in loop number 1. Then we come up here to the final expression. After each loop iteration we come up here, and essentially what we do is we just add 1 to the counter. Remember, we've seen the increment operator. The increment operator using plus plus just adds 1 to a number. So counter had a value of 1. After the first loop runs, we add 1 to it, so now counter has a value of 2. So we log out I am in loop number 2. Then we add 1 to it, so now counter has a value of 3. And then we check our condition. Is 3 less than or equal to 10? Yes, it is. So we enter the loop, etc., etc. Okay? So let's just save and refresh. And we get I'm in loop number 1 all the way up to 10. And if you wanted, you could change that to 20 to run from numbers 1 up to 20. Okay, awesome. Okay, great. Now, what I want us to do is I want us to use a for loop to iterate over an array of values. Okay, so that's what I want to do in this tutorial. Now, we know how we can log out different values of an array. So remember, arrays start counting at index 0. So heroes at index 0 would be Superman. Heroes at index 1 would be Batman. Heroes at index 2 would be Wonder Woman. And heroes at index 3 would be the Flash. To prove that to you, if I just say console.log and I want to log out heroes, okay, but I want to log out the various indexes. So that's going to be Superman. We're going to just log them all out to the console. I want you to see this. We can change this for loop, by the way, just to, run from numbers 1 to 5. I don't necessarily need multiple values. Okay, so index 1, index 2, and index 3. So what's going to happen? Well, this is going to log out to the console Superman, Superman. This is going to log out Batman. And remember, the reason this logs out Batman is heroes is an array. Arrays, we know in JavaScript, start at the 0 at index, okay? So when you log out heroes at index 0, it's going to be Superman. Heroes index 1 will be Batman. Heroes at index 2 will be Wonder Woman, Wonder Woman. And then finally, heroes at index 3 is going to be the Flash, okay? So let's just save and refresh. And we see there we've logged out Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Flash. and then all of these different loops, right? Now what I want to do is, instead of logging out to the console, I'm in loop number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's start counting at 0 and use that to log out the values of the heroes array. So what we can do is, instead of having to console.log out, heroes at index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, let's just essentially use a for loop for that. So what we're going to do is, we're going to start counting at index 0, okay? And then instead of logging out console.log I'm in loop number and whatever loop we're in, let's just paste in here console.log heroes at whatever index our counter variable is on, okay? So remember, when we log out console.log heroes at index 0, that's going to be Superman, right? Now, we can use a for loop to replace all of this code, and believe it or not, we've actually already done it. So to prove this to you, if I just delete all of this code, okay, what we can do is we can run the for loop for 0, 1, 2, 3. So we'll run this loop while the counter is less than or equal to 3, and this is going to log out our heroes, okay? To prove that to you, let me just save and refresh, and then we will explain what happened. We see here Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and the Flash, okay? So how did that work? Well, we've declared a for loop. We initialize the counter variable to be 0. So when we enter the loop, and we do, because remember, 0 is less than or equal to 3, that evaluates to true, we enter the code block here. So we say console.log heroes at index of counter, and this starts off at 0. So heroes at index 0 will be Superman, so we log that out to the console, okay? Then, after the loop runs, we increment the counter variable, so 0 plus 1 is 1. Then we log out console.log heroes at index 1, that'll be Batman. At index 2 will be Wonder Woman, and index 3 will be the Flash, okay? So let's just save and refresh, and we still get that. Okay, awesome. Now, just a couple of things to improve our code. It's common, I don't want to say behavior, what's the word I'm looking for? It's common practice or shorthand notation in JavaScript to use I. It's common convention when essentially writing a for loop. So instead of having counter, quite a very long word, you can just replace counter with I. So I is just a variable, and what it essentially denotes is essentially our counter variable. So this is still going to run. We're saying for let I be equal to 0. Okay, I is just a counter variable. It's still a counter. While I is less than or equal to 3, we want the for loop to run. And after each loop iteration, and when I say loop iteration every time you run the loop, just come up here and add 1 to it. Okay. Now, here's a problem. I've hard-coded this for loop to run while I is less than or equal to 3. But what if we were to add another hero to our array? Let's say Aquaman, right? Apologies for my spelling. Well, if I save and refresh, what's going to happen? We're not getting Aquaman. And that's because we've hard-coded this loop to run while I is less than or equal to 3. So you might be saying to yourself, okay, well, let's run it while I is less than or equal to 4. Problem solved, we now got Aquaman, right? Let's have a look. And we do, but here's a better way to do it. What you can do is you can actually access the length property of an array, okay? So for example, if I just show you this, if I say console.log heroes.length, this is actually going to essentially tell us how many elements are in the array. So if we save and refresh, we get 5, okay? So here we've written code that says, let's run the loop while I is less than or equal to 4, okay? But what we can do is we can actually change this. We can say, run the loop while I is less than heroes.length, okay? So we were running the loop from 0 to 4. This is still going to work, okay? I'll tell you why. Heroes.length, this array, has 5 elements to it, okay? And now I've changed the code here. I'm saying run while I is less than heroes.length. So run while I is less than 5. And the great thing about this is this code is dynamic. So if you add elements to the array, the code is still going to work. Let me just show you this, okay? So the code still works, right? No need to log that out to the console anymore. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another element to the array. So let's add cyborg. I can't spell that, believe it or not. I apologize. I hope that's correct. But now if I save and refresh, our code has dynamically changed to include this. See? We get all the elements of the array. And this is because we know we have to start counting at index 0, but what we can do is we can run our for loop while I is less than the array name dot length. Okay? So right now this array has 6 elements to it. So if we run while I is less than heroes dot length, that'll be I is less than 6. So it's going to count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it's going to stop. Because once we run for cyborg, the last element in the array, we then come up here to our final expression, add 1 to I. So remember, plus plus is the increment operator. So now we have our counter variable I is at 6. So then when we check is 6 less than 6, that will evaluate to false, okay, because they're the same. So therefore, this condition evaluates to false. We stop running the loop and we continue on running the code in our script or our JavaScript file, okay? So guys, that is just a bit more practice with the for loop in JavaScript. I'll see you in the next tutorial. We'll continue to get a bit more practice with the for loop. It's very powerful. For loops work very well with arrays. And just a little takeaway, you're probably wondering, okay, Dara's showing me a for loop and he's showing me that works with an array, but why should I care? Well, just imagine if you were creating an application and you were sending a GET request to an API, you were getting in data, maybe the weather in various cities, okay? You could use a for loop to iterate over all the different elements in an array and then print it out to the screen, okay, if you're making an app. So we'll leave that tutorial there. I'll see you in the next one.